My question to you is on graph paper or you want dots? Like you want to be able to draw your squares?
I want the pale blue graph paper because I'm old. And that's
Yeah, that's what my knee-jerk answer.
Fair, that's fair.
Although maybe like maybe something that had like slightly more solid lines when in several inch squares, encompassing smaller squares, because then you could do it for like, quick rip out miniature scale maps.
All right, well, we are the little game, pre-funk, pre-game.
My dream product that I could never make, dream about somebody else making, are abstracted miniatures and tiles, where instead of having like a bunch of monsters, you have something that is sort of like suggests a monster in the same way the knight chess piece suggests a knight. All it does is it's sort of like it's like an abstract monster-ish sculpture that takes up the required number of squares.
A neat idea. I'm glad I'm stealing.
And also have some kind of like battle surface that is really sort of more like a chessboard, except maybe plot in walls, markers.
And do you want your walls to be tall, or you want them?
Yeah, I like the suggestion. It's sort of like something where, I find myself in this weird spot. I do stuff with them. I'm not against them or anything. I'm playing a 4th edition campaign for many, many years still. But but what I find gets me is when you have a miniature. Sometimes I find a miniature that is all painted and looks great, but is a substitute for another monster, is like worse for my imagination than an unpainted miniature. Or a plastic toy or something like that, because I just find my mind is not attaching to what it's supposed to represent as strongly, so it can represent whatever I'm told it is.
Well, right now we are representing ThursdAGE, and I see that we've got lots of people hanging out in chat. Hello, everybody. I'm glad that you're here. We've got lots. And I double down on what you're saying. It's yay. I'm the disembodied voice. No, this is a game. We want to build up our momentum. Everybody. Hello, David Hubbard says afternoon. Might as well do it, huh? Feeling it? You feeling? You ready?
Sure. I mean,
yeah.
That was just.
That was just the. All right. Well, here we go.
I just had $1 million Kickstarter idea. I don't know if it got out there, but.
Oh, I think it did. I
can't do anything with it, but somebody it does, and it doesn't suck. Let me know, and I will just be full of endorsements.
I love it.
Instead of me,
Malcolm's. Hey everybody, welcome to ThursdAGE with Owen Casey Stevens, and we have a special guest, Malcolm Sheppard. And you know what today is? It's a big day. It's Fantasy Age, Trojan War. It's released. It's in the wild. It's in everybody's hands. It's going gangbusters. Everyone's excited about it. Someone else said, "Thank you so much. It's my birthday." Yeah, it's really exciting. A good day to have Malcolm on, and you folks will the last ThursdAGE because you popped in for Owen. Very much appreciated. Owen, you were missed, and I'm glad that you are back. Owen, how are you?
Pretty good. Us too skeptical to have any emotion.
Ditto. Yeah, I'm masking up still.
But
go ahead.
I like that the numbers are all going to the.
That is true. That is true. Malcolm, how are you doing?
Well, up here in the Canadas, we're behind compared to the United States on vaccination. I'm in locked down province. Yep, it's masks. I'm out and about. So,
Fair enough.
but I'm a game developer and I already work from home, so mostly I just don't go to restaurants.
Sounds like we're having some audio thing every few words there.
Not me.
But you and I kind of. And do me a favor, Owen, would you well and make sure you have a volume on? Good on all three of us. Okay, yeah. Um, don't I, but such. Um, yeah. Okay. Let's keep talking. Okay, during longer sent. Okay, Stan says we're cutting out during longer sentences, so if we could order one.
That's good.
Okay.
I like it. Well, I'm gonna putter around with the audio. I'm not sure that it is something I can do. But because it makes activity still, we'll see what we can do. While I do that, why don't you two talk about Trojan War?
Trojan War.
Trojan War.
Yeah, so that came out. And it is modeled on and well, we call it kind of the third era line at Green Ronin, but the old Mythic Vistas supplement by Aaron Rosenberg. So that was the basis for doing a streamlined age tree. Didn't want it to be big for a couple of reasons. Also, could be timely fashion. And second of all, so that we don't go, hey, here's a book all of a sudden and got to pay a lot of money for it. I mean, you can if you want. I'm sure we have the capacity to take extra money, but uh, but we kind of wanted to have just a little snack. Oh, and core book.
Yum.
And people are going to ask, yes, part of the entire point for book will work with this. Book works with what you have, and it will work with what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So there is no giant line in the sand where you can't material in Trojan War, all the new stuff.
Yeah. In fact, actually, a sort of a stopgap in Trojan War, there's a suggested little modification to character advancement, the way it's done in the basic rule that is actually taken from the new core rule. Because in new core rule book, well, the last time I looked at it, you could get a specialization at level 1 to sort of really nail down your character's role. And we suggest that as an alternate option. Trojan War, kind of get an early start on something that's going to be.
So speaking of stuff in Fantasy Age stuff, did not just erase the word D. A ground up redesign of the concept of this product for. Talk to us a little bit about the stuff you added this specific and white.
Okay, what a fantastic question.
Thank you, Malcolm.
And all right, well, before this, I had done Fantasy Age conversion for Tales from the Citadel. So I kind of had that way of doing things on my brain. And I found that kind of an enjoyable thing. And so for both that and this, the idea is that, Fantasy Age provides a specific experience has specific rules. I wanted to do it as if we were kind of doing it for the first time as something specifically for fantasy. However, we sort of have a checklist from the D20 version of some stuff that would be right, and that translates into talents and specializations. This stuff is structurally different with classes. That's really the way you have. So I think the original had a swift-footed warrior, running warrior, and so we have the swift-footed fighting style, which you can take as a talent. And we especially built out specializations. So inside there's a list of talents and specializations that are appropriate for characters from that. And then on top of that, we've added some new stuff. Oh, and along with focuses and everything else. It takes you through the character creation process for playing a character in that period with background, profession. Everything's in there. But the idea was that, because Fantasy Age has 3 or 4 classes, right? Really, where the character differentiation is going to come in is going to be through talents and specializations. The other aspect too, and this is really where Steve did the lion's share of the work, is with how magic works, because obviously Fantasy Age and D&D have much different magic systems, but however, because D&D is D&D, it has a kind of inertia, right? In that when you do something as a supplement for Dungeons and Dragons or a D20 game that cleaves close to it, the question always seems to be, how are you going to fit this into Dungeons and Dragons, right? So you're always kind of having to ask, well, this has to happen no matter what the setting is. It has to be a setting where someone can cast magic missile, right? So because we're freed from those constraints, we can get more into, getting closer toward the magic the way it is in the mythology, but not going all the way there because the Trojan War isn't full of spellcasters. There's one guy, Altus, and he just he's the seer and he has bad news.
It's amazing how many Greek stories can include the line, and there's a seer and they have bad news.
They have bad news. Yeah. So, and Steve added some new arcana that that have these mythic origins. And of course, because we had the original Trojan War to work with, there were a boatload of magic items. And I was especially happy to do Fantasy Age treatments of those, because I think that is often a place where Fantasy Age needs a bit of a boost.
I agree. And I got to say, one of the really cool things about having all of these Trojan War magic items is that if you read some medieval myths and legends and even history, things like the armor of Ajax and the sword of Agamemnon, et cetera, keep showing up in the romantic medieval histories as these go all the way back to the Greek era. So even if you pick up Trojan War and you're not planning on running a Trojan War game, having rules for this is what the curse arcana looks like, and maybe no one in the modern era knows, modern being whatever you're doing with your Fantasy Age, maybe no one knows how to do that arcana, but now you've got these rules for the stuff from the age of myths and legends of your campaign setting, so you can borrow, we need Durendal, whatever, we need some famous thing from that era to bring forward, and now it's considered this famous relic.
Yeah, and that's very much in keeping with how medieval romance referenced the classics too. I love that kind of stuff. I love, I'm talking about part of sword furniture or something like that coming from Troy or something like that, right?
Yep.
Although I haven't read the Song of Roland and a Dog's Age, so of course nothing specific is coming up to me. But yeah, I love that stuff, and I love the idea that a lot of these are conceptually portable. Like one of the things we tweaked is really in the GMing section, and one of those things was to add this emphasis that, you know, everybody who's encountered these legends has changed them and made them their own. So, I mean, if you look at, and this is something I've said a couple of times, and I think I said it last week. If you look at medieval depictions of the events of the Iliad, right, they will have uh, paintings of medieval fortifications, and heroes will be wearing 14th century armor, right? So that stuff is always, people have always changed that stuff around, and you should feel comfortable doing that as well, whether it's to maybe de-emphasize some of the implicitly and sometimes explicitly gendered horrible brutality that's in there, or even if you just want to do things differently with the way people look or the technology or things like that, because I have the cover behind me as sort of an indication of that, but a lot of people really want to look like hoplites, even though it's not the period for hoplites. And the thing is that's fine, because in the retelling, they would also draw them and paint them as hoplites, right?
Yep.
So, and because it is this body of myth that is pegged to maybe a historical period, it's all right to do all of those things, and that's the way Homer did it, right? So we encourage you to.
And if someone really wants to go into the aesthetic and the history and really tie it to the historic period that it may or may not be referencing, you can sure do that, right? And one of the things that Malcolm notes is that this book is written for the age of the internet, so there are certain things where we can just say, hey, these are things, feel free to go look them up. You bought a PDF, you have access to a computer.
Yeah, I mean, we can't really beat Wikipedia, right? Like, certainly someone said, well, people might get it wrong with nothing. And it's like, there isn't nothing. There's some high level guidance, and there's also a bunch of points. And this is something that I kind of emphasized a bit in editing it. The Trojan War isn't just a bunch of guys on a beach running up to some walls and fighting and then going home and arguing, right? I mean, there's a whole series of stories about getting to Troy, right? And there's a whole bunch of stories around, Troy is the preeminent state in a bunch of states in Asia Minor, right? Some of whom come to help them. And, that's where you have things like the Amazons coming in, stuff like that. So you have to think of it as this wider epoch that you can work in. Otherwise, you'll just be running up to the walls and
which makes for a fun 2-hour movie.
Yeah.
And if you want that one scenario, go for it. I mean, it really is a campaign setting, and one of the things you certainly could do if you wanted to would be take that and scrub the serial numbers off and rename everything, and or even just borrow parts of it, right? If you're like, hey, we're running a Freeport game, but we want this ship to show up in the middle of this area where it looks like there's going to be a vast political conquest, and we're going to do weird Flintlocks versus Gladius games. Totally an option.
Can you imagine these like Bronze Age superhumans just showing up, right?
Yeah.
Like, they show up in this primitive looking ship, right? And then this guy in bronze armor jumps out. It's kind of like, when you're playing Civ and the Vikings are still around after you have skyscrapers. Except that, of course, if you stat them like Greek heroes, really they're a kind of monster, right? It's a boatload of superhuman, of half divine, really angry people who've shown up for some reason, usually because a god tricked them.
That is a fascinating example. Speaking of gods, talk a little bit about how you handled divinities and the influence of divinities in this book,
Okay.
because it's a really interesting take and it's very different from anything we've done with Fantasy Age before.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I really wanted to make sure that that the gods were still gods in the Greek mythic sense, which means they're like really immortal, not they live forever until you stab them in the head, right? They literally can't be killed. However, there are two moderating factors in the original mythology that I kind of try my best to translate. And one of those is the idea of fate, right? There are things that the gods just can't do or must do, and there are things that must happen. And well, in an RPG, that's the GM, right? So the GM kind of has the role of fate. And we also say that fate expresses itself mechanically in constraining how the gods can manifest, right? And the sort of model we use you know, comes from the source material in that you have the gods show up and they don't really interact with anyone other than one hero, right? But within that domain of say whisking a hero they like away from a battle, or giving them a treasure or something like that, they can pretty much just do it, right? Now, if a god doesn't like you and wants to beat you up, well, they're still immortal. But depending on your level, when a god is angry at you, your your relative might is sort of a measurement that's set partly by faith and partly by the second factor, which is the god's sense of pride. How much energy they're going to put into that fight with you, right? So when you can in fact reduce a god to 0 health, but what happens is they get annoyed and they leave. And the rules of fate mean that they just can't come back and kill you later on, right? You've gotten one over on them, and that reflects how they kind of work pretty well, right? Because the gods just don't. They're not min maxers, right? They get embarrassed, they leave, they come back later. They follow narrative rules, which are the rules of fate, which kind of cycle around to it. And
Yeah.
those are. I got one more thing. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
And whether or not a god likes you is determined by the bond you have with them, right? And that is something where I lifted the relationship rules that have been in the Fantasy Age Companion, I think, and in Blue Rose, and they're in Modern Age too, right? And I sort of put them to divine relationships with some associated stunts. So if a god hates you, right, they can select the rocks fall on you stunt, right? Although it usually won't kill you because it's just fate doesn't like it when the gods do something that's not dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, fate almost becomes like the rules of physics that even the gods must follow, right? It's another actual force in the setting. It's just sort of not a anthropomorphized one. There are things that are will or won't or should or shouldn't happen. That there's a weight, a momentum to them. The gods can buck it, but they can't just flip it off like a light switch.
Yeah, yeah, and Zeus like end up like later in Hesiod and stuff. You'll have aspects of fate get personified, but in the Iliad and Odyssey, it's kind of vaguely Zeus's job because you're king of the gods now. You got to figure out how everybody should act, right? And in fact, the Trojan War starts, I guess, with Zeus going, maybe there are too many people around, and I should kill a bunch of them.
What's a good way to make that happen?
Yeah.
I very much felt when I was reading your and just now listening to your description of how gods operate that they really are immortal. It's like operating within the mortal realm and dealing with mortals is a lot like trying to put together a piece of IKEA furniture. And if you hit your thumb with a hammer, you may put the hammer down and walk away. That does not mean the IKEA furniture has defeated you. You're just not going to mess with it right now. You're annoyed. Your thumb is sore. Your life was never in danger, but you're
Yes.
going to go away. And But on the other hand, if you're doing some other piece of IKEA furniture and everything slots together neatly, you're like, oh, I like that. That's nice, and you might get more of that. So sort of that level of, I can get a paper cut, I can be annoyed, something can go well or go badly. My existence is never on the line, but I might just put something on a shelf and not deal with it anymore. Troy, you still with us, my man? No, I'm gonna go with no. Okay.
All right. I'm gonna look at the Facebook window and see. Oh, there we are. We're still talking.
Yeah, nope, we're there. We're talking.
All
this is not just for us, although it was before.
Yes, I am still here. I'm sorry.
There you are.
Yeah, I was. I'm puttering around with our closed captioning.
Yeah, I'm seeing that actually.
Yeah, I want people to be able to hear us. Or see us if they aren't. Yes, the distant voice, Troy. But I am here. Yes. You know, I get into this sort of a state when I'm listening to the two of you, and I do it both when it's individual or when it's you two together. You two are truly like, this is your thing. It is like watching. I mean, you speak in sort of a I would say shorthand, but it actually is pretty long. You speak in a longhand. No, it's just it's a delight. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy it a lot, and I think that it was, I kind of turned things off for just a moment. Yeah, there's that Troy while they're talking about Troy. There's just you have a pattern and a sort of I think it's probably your many decades, the millennia that you have spent on this earth toiling on the tabletop roleplay genre. And so anyway, so that's why, as I was messing around with this, I was struck by what a unique opportunity this is to hear the two of you sort of unpack this stuff. And I'm hoping that there are folks who are listening that are enjoying that as well. Rain mentions it sure can feel defeating. Are you talking about when you're up against the gods? I'm presuming that is what you mean. Somebody mentioned something here about the Testament adopted into modern age. I don't know.
Wow.
What do you think about that? Is that sort of like the third rail of tabletop roleplay games?
I know a lot of people like Testament, but I'm not very familiar with it. So it would, the first thing I would have to do is read Testament.
Yeah.
So.
I am familiar with Testament because that was more my game system in my era of trying to do stuff for Green Ronin. And I don't think it's a third rail. I think we are in an era where there's a very legit question to be asked. Are the risks of doing this bad and wrong greater than the chance of producing something good and useful?
There we go.
And I think Testament has a whole lot of places where you could get it wrong. So that doesn't mean we'd never do it. I am delighted by the Trojan War book that Malcolm has put together, and I love the idea of maybe some other stuff other than Testament coming along and being something where we say, hey Malcolm, read this and tell us what you think about doing a fantasy age book with some of this material. But Testament would not be the thing that I would go to next. To touch back a little bit on the idea that can be a little disconcerting to have to face gods, I really think that it's good to think of gods in the context of something like Trojan War as being similar to the weather, right? You cannot defeat a hurricane. You can't stop it. It's coming. It's going to do some damage. But you can survive it. And you can still accomplish your goals. So the gods, rather than being these omnipotent beings that you can't defeat who will stand between you and the walls of Troy or getting home or whatever, they are like the weather. They are environmental hazards that happen to have names and faces and that you can reason with. But ultimately, even if they decide what we are going to do is make your life difficult and we will never like you, that's just about creating opportunities for adventures and things to overcome. It's not that they will teleport you to the floor in front of their throne and drop a stone on you and there's nothing you can do about it. It's all about, I will send an ill wind and they will end up on an island where a sorceress may decide to turn them all into pigs. but you still get to deal with the wind and the sorceress and the pigs on your own. And if you get off that island, they might go, okay, well, now I'm going to try and trick them into going and eating from this herd of cattle that are guarded by cyclopses, and the cyclopses will be taking about it. So it's a series of problems caused by gods, and you can sometimes talk to them. It's a lot like the GM, right? The GM is there to cause problems for you to overcome. You're never going to find yourself in a place where the thing is, okay, now beat the GM, because the GM can always just say rocks fall, everyone dies.
Yeah, and the gods do have those powers, but their restraints in Trojan War are really they're the restraints of fate, which are the restraints of story, right?
Mm.
So if you meet a god on the field and you force them to leave, then they can't, well, I'm just going to come back and drop a rock on you. They're not allowed to do that. Sometimes you have to give the hero their day. And this is one of those things that I think requires a little bit of meta thinking, because, you know, it's still a game supplement, which means we're still dealing with the element of chance, except we're dealing with the element of chance in a setting that is highly deterministic, right? I don't know if anybody in the audience has read Song of Achilles, but one of the themes in Song of Achilles is that everybody knows Achilles is going to die. Well, not everybody, but like it is known that Achilles is going to die at a certain time and place. And so a lot of the action really has to do with sort of people trying to, well, Patroclus trying to work his way around, saving his lover and dealing with being there while there are these enormous burdens, right? Placed on someone who, well, as the greatest of the Greeks, is actually ready to take those up and has a reflex to do it, right? And instead, what we do in a game context is we have bonds, we have the optional rules for piety, which sort of are this more micromanagey track of how much various gods will like and dislike you based on your actions. And then the idea is sort of retroactively that is part of the fate of the character, right? So you're kind of in this weird situation where, if you level in a Trojan War game and you reach 10th level and you're full of heroic stuff, well, then retroactively, you were always supposed to be that hero. And you weren't supposed to be the person, the first person to land at Troy who immediately dies. Right? Which is part of the whole, Prositalos or something like that, or Laius or something. But there's a prophecy that the first person to land on the beach at Troy will die, right? And it looks like it's going to be Odysseus, but he's smart and he jumps on a shield, so he's technically not on the beach. And then the second guy is actually the first guy is killed.
Yeah,
right?
And some of it is we don't know if you're the guy in the mouth of the Trojan horse who's going to get stuck with a spear until after we have run the encounter.
Yes.
So I want to, because you are, in addition to the writer for this, you're the developer for Modern Age, I want to fanboy at you a little bit and ask you some questions about how to combine those two. Let us say that someone wants to run special forces from the modern era go back to fight the Battle of Troy, right? Like an El Sprig de Camp, lest darkness fall kind of scenario, or some of the stuff that has been done with, like, going back to the Alamo or whatever. Could you take equipment from modern age, like guns and walkie-talkies and such, and use those rules in Fantasy Age and Trojan War with Fantasy Age characters? Would that work?
Yeah, you could. There might be a bit of ad hoc rulings that have to happen because there's some things that are a bit different, like the structure of the stunts and things like that. One thing, if it's Mythic Troy, well, you might have some differences in modes, right? So you go back in time and, you're fighting these heroes that are advancing as Fantasy Age characters, which makes them the equivalent of cinematic mode characters in modern age. So if you're with a gritty or pulpy mode mercenary company with your handful of health and your, defense that does not, go up, and your general lack of relative ferocity, right? Then again, you're kind of in that state where like you're not dealing really with people as the enemy. You're dealing with a bunch of sort of half divine monsters, right? And you can show that off in different ways, right? Like, so one of the talents is demigod, right? In Trojan War, and
Yep.
one of the things it allows you to do is to perform a heroic labor, right? Which is to do something that's not like going to be immediately like a thing you can do in a fight or something like that, but it's the kind of thing that that Heracles does, right? Um, in his labor. So you can do something like, well, I'll just build this fort. I'll just build this fort single-handedly. There are a bunch of rocks lying around, and we just say that you can do it, right? Because that's where the rule of cool for those characters, right? So,
Right.
so imagine being like a little mercenary company, and this guy is just building a defensive wall by himself, and occasionally throwing those entire chunks of rock at you, uh, because he's like the Telamonian Ajax or someone else with ridiculous, uh, divinely granted strength. Actually, that reminds me of the sort of like heroes monster thing works for that too, because like one of the things I was reading when I was doing research is I think it's when the Telamonian Ajax is in Scythia, and he like depopulates the wildlife
Right.
while he's fighting Trojan allies there. Or is it the Thracians? I don't know. I did a lot of reading.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, you could do that. Actually, the one thing you would have to change is I probably would drop toughness on both sides.
Yeah.
Which makes it extra scary for modern age characters, but Fantasy Age doesn't have toughness because armor is employed more aggressively in it, right?
Right.
You need to balance that out on both sides.
So I wanna step in here real fast. We've got some comments from the Peanut Gallery. One of them is from a Pook, and he asks I think a very critical, crucial question. Do the gods ever want to get down and party with the heroes? And if so, do they get any kind of bonus afterwards?
No, the gods only party in Ethiopia.
There you go. None
in
for
the
you.
source. No, it's seriously, it's in there, right? Like there are times where where they have to contact the gods, and the gods are literally just in Ethiopia.
There you go. Let's see.
So,
David Hubbard says, "I remember a rule that the gods couldn't directly undo something one did to a mortal, but that they could compensate in a different way. They compensate that mortal in a different way to offset the drawbacks. Is that is that a thing you recall from the tomes, from the dusty tomes?"
well, I mean, I can't I'm not an expert on Greek mythology, right? Um, so all I can do is the gods. My understanding is that there is fate, and the gods don't really control it. Um, and their job, in as much as they have a job, is to sort of keep the world running in accord with fate. One of the big differences with the Greek gods, as opposed to uh, what we see in Norse mythology and in a bunch of other myth cycles, is that there's no apocalypse, right? The gods, it's not this Clash of the Titan thing where the gods need you, especially. Uh, it's more that they consider humans as something to be managed, right? Because humans have these rules they have to follow. They have to follow laws of hospitality. They have to honor the gods. there's a bunch of stuff they have to do.
Right, we have to have
They
a clear
have to eat each
path
other.
for the restroom, so you can't block us off or like, pull our walls or make furniture around us or anything. So we stand there and get starve
Yeah.
and pee our pants. And oh wait, I'm
Well,
thinking
the
of The
thing,
Sims.
yeah, basically, except the gods sometimes think, well, maybe we should just starve half of you, right? And that would make you easier to manage. But the thing is, if everybody dies, then the gods just feel like they did a bad job, right? It's not the worst thing in the world for them. And the gods don't have to follow the rules that humans follow, right? So the gods can, be inhospitable and do all these terrible things to each other because all of those rules apply to mortals. So the guidelines under which the gods interact with mortals basically is about getting mortals to follow their ritual and cultural obligations, right? Which the gods themselves are not beheld to. And sometimes if you get screwed because a mortal breaks the rules, then yeah, a god is going to come and help you, both because you were treated unfairly, although the god only cares if the god liked you in the first place, but more importantly, to go punish that guy who screwed you and, was not nice when you went to their fortress, right?
To disincentivize other mortals from breaking the rules.
Yes.
Hey, we got a question here. This is interesting. Larry Dixon asks, so many of my characters over the years actually want to do labors, feats of architecture, city building, infrastructure, and so on. So the heroic labor mechanic could work for that, couldn't it?
Oh yeah.
Hey, guess what? I have art.
What?
I have art.
You have art?
I have art. You ready for it?
Where did art come from?
Art came from, where it came. Came from Stan, man.
Just because I know doesn't mean I don't want to hear
Oh,
you say
that's
it.
true. I see. We're doing theater, don't it? Stan says, damn it, Ares, you killed the humans again. Control Z. Control Z, Athena. Control Z. All right, let me show you this. I love it.
Talking about dang it, Ares, you killed the humans again. I'll have the shellfish surprise. Shellfish, I predict doom. See, this is why you never get invited to dinner, Seer. Okay, that's hysterical, Stan.
That is the Stan classic. Thank you, sir.
I was with some people. We finally managed to get together with some friends we haven't seen in a while for Barbecue Wednesday yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that people who play the games The Sims frequently sound like Greek gods.
They do.
Right? Like,
They're so
why did you build
cruel.
a wall all the way around that person's swimming pool so they drown?
That's
well,
right. Yeah.
I want one ghost of every color, and you get every time you die in a different way, you get a different ghost. So, and I don't have it out for that one guy. I don't care. There are rules to The Sims, and I want to see what I can do with them.
Yeah, yeah. I always find too that people with a certain kind of boredom that matches a certain kind of intellect kind of turn into monsters. So in the sense, you're just like, I see you, like I'm witnessing this. Going to call a therapist. But yeah, that is a truth for sure.
It reminds
Go
me
ahead.
of, I don't know if anybody in the audience or anywhere has read the Long Sun books by Gene Wolfe. But they take place on this generation ship with a bunch of uploaded personalities of important people who have set themselves up as gods. And I think you could definitely do a weird science fantasy Trojan War where, the gods are petty jerks because they're all like personality copies of CEOs.
Oh, right.
who put themselves on a probe that contained the, genetic stock to recreate Earth life. They shoot it at some planet and decide to set up an ancient Greece-like tyranny just to fool with people.
Just
You have a similar thing
Which
in
weirdly, if
Lord
you
of
want to see a
Light.
movie that sure feels that way, go see Gods of Egypt.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Rain says it's all a simulation. Howdy, Slit. Good to see you. Good to see everybody here, by the way. You are tuning in to ThursdAGE with Owen Casey Stevens and Malcolm Sheppard, and we're talking Trojan War, Fantasy Age Trojan War. And I was just going to share my idea of a city called Trojan, and then it gets a horse, and it's filled with little Troys. And they're all me.
Well, I mean, we wouldn't know that because we're all too smart to look a gift horse in the mouth.
True that. Very true.
Oh, that reminds me of a joke I can't tell on the stream.
Oh,
all right, you'll have to tell me later.
Yeah,
I'll tell you. I'll tell you both later.
Yeah. This is a good. Okay, I want to read this. Our dearest Nicole says, "My impression is that there's a lot of pedantry involved with the decisions of the gods. Yes, I technically banished my daughter, but I also made sure she had a nice house and a bunch of amenities on a lonely island where she now resides, which is a little different than, say, being staked out to have one's liver repeatedly torn out." Yeah.
Yeah, when gods, especially in Greek mythology, when gods are foiled, they are frequently, even if they are obedient, they're grumpy about it, right? Yes, sure, I am not allowed to kill Odysseus. He is protected. Oh, but wow, I can mess with him when he's trying to get home.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. Pook says, "What about a giant wooden Troy filled with tiny horses? That would be weird. Plus, they'd be so hard to hear because they'd be a little hoarse."
It would offend Poseidon.
Would it?
Poseidon's the horse guy.
Yeah, no, totally would.
Absolutely. No tiny horses for Poseidon. Larry says, gods doing themed planets. There was a show called Star Trek once. Yeah.
Yeah, there totally was. Well, and of course, I was talking to Malcolm about taking modern age stuff and dumping it in fantasy age Troy, but you could do the opposite, right? You could take, if you wanted to, I'm not saying that you should use Hercules in New York, the movie, as a guide for anything, but you sure could take some of the stuff from Trojan Age, from Trojan War, Fantasy Age, and stick it in a modern game. If, maybe the Greek gods are still around and they are the CEOs, and FedEx is run by Hermes, and that's the secret behind the veil of everything, and the players then get to either deal with some of these problems or play with some of these mechanics.
Oh my goodness, that actually reminds me. So there's another game for another company I worked on called Scion for Onyx Path, and I did some of the systems and core writing, and certainly there's that kind of premise in a game like Scion, right? And it's and you have it in American Gods and the Percy Jackson books and all of those things, and you can certainly do that transplanting. You can do that. You can take some of the talents and items from Trojan War. You can export them to modern age, and you can maybe add some stuff on top from, say, the modern age companion, right? Because that's where the power rules are, at least until modern age powers come. And certainly you can make these semi-divine protagonists, right? You could even put a sort of fantastical skin on some of the Lazarus talents in the Lazarus book, which are these like
absolutely
technologically enhanced superhumans, right? And you could use those as well, right? So you can easily mix and match these things up. There are only a couple of little things that you have to mind, and one of those is that Modern Age has 3 modes, and Cinematic mode is the one that is most Fantasy Age-like. And there are a couple of differences because it's not a class-based system. However, and this is actually something I'm going to jump way ahead here, right? So if you want the Envoys goodies in the new Fantasy Age core book in Modern Age, that's also doable, because one of the things that we did in Modern Age is we translated some class abilities into talents for Modern Age. And certainly you can do that shift between different kinds of character traits that way pretty easily with the Modern Age framework, because the Modern Age framework basically takes everything one level advancement at a time. So if you want to slot something like that in, you
I have a
Yeah.
question. So we're oh, sorry, Owen, I want to let you finish your thought.
My thought was, yeah.
Good. I like it. Um, so we're little less than 15 minutes out, and I'm curious. So looking at the reaction that Trojan War has received, I mean, people are very excited about it, and know that you can pick it up in at you can pick it up over at Drive Through RPG, and you can pick it up on at the Green Ronin store and either place. But one of the first things that I saw, even just when we announced that there was going to be an announcement about it, that we were going to, we're getting there, was a laundry list of era and times of
Ooh,
our
yeah.
yeah. So talk to me about like understanding that this doesn't tie you down to any kind of commitment, and everybody understands that we're just sort of we're playing some if there were nothing else in the way.
100 Years War.
100 Years War, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that. That instant answer fascinates me.
Me too.
The reason it's an instant answer is because the very foundations of role playing implicitly assume that it's a 100 Years War like environment. In original Dungeons and Dragons and its immediate successors, that's where the balance of the equipment is coming from, and a lot of the base assumptions. All they do is get rid of guns, right? They would, because they had guns back then. But D&D
They sort of got rid of guns and Christianity, but
yeah,
kept
they
a lot
got
of
rid
the
of
things
guns
that
and Christian.
but kept a lot of the things that Christianity had introduced.
Yeah. So because the 100 Years War is such an enormous influence on role playing, and also because a lot of the scholarship has that's available to just ordinary folks like you and I, has gotten better, right? Because the original, like when you go back to D&D, I think it comes I think it's a book from like the early 1900s that's used as the source for all the weapons and armor. And so we, in the nth generation, the nth game, have used those terms and those ideas and sort of translated them, and now they're kind of their own thing. So if we went back to the sources as we understand them now, and worked on it, I think it would be super cool. And also, the last reason is because I train and I do a bit of coaching in historical fencing, and that is my favorite period.
They had the
For
nicest
swing the sword
fences.
around.
I mean, they kept all the animals in their pens. They kept people out of their yards. I mean, I think that's he's talking about
That's right.
the actual, weaponry, the trained what do they call it? Fighting skill.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Like we have period manuals that tell you how people moved and fought and things like that, with a fair amount of detail. And so having that and using that as sort of the basis for like some new talents and things like that, and getting into the material culture and the social organization. And also, it's a big, terrible, war-torn time, so there's plenty of opportunities for adventure because all
stuff to
terrible
do.
times
Yeah.
are fun times for gamers.
Right. That's right. Relive dysentery, friends, on the Oregon Trail. Hey, Rain asks, is there anything from Trojan War that will be going into the core rulebook?
So we're not going to take any of the stuff like the talents or the arcana or any of that. Malcolm wrote drafts of a bunch of the rules for the core rulebook. And that was sort of where we started with this was after we sort of had a age writers and devs conference, and then Malcolm wrote big chunks of the core rulebook, and then I wrote small chunks of the core rulebook, and Steve wrote a little, and Crystal wrote a little. And then we're getting developed and merged together. So a lot of the philosophy and ideas are the same, right? And he was talking about like specializations at first level, which isn't in the basic rule book and is standard in the core rule book. But my my vision of Trojan War is it should feel like, if you got the core rule book, you should feel like Trojan War came out for that book. So we're not duplicating any of the new add-on things. I mean, the material with the gods and the demigod talent, none of that is stuff that I'm putting in the core rulebook, if for no other reason than I don't have room, right? There's plenty of stuff that we want. I want the core rulebook to be a complete rulebook on its own. I want you to be able to remove your basic rulebook from your shelf, make a little wider space, put the core rulebook in there, and everything else is good to go. So I got to see what Malcolm was doing as he did it, right? I saw the final version of the book and gave my very minor feedback on things. And I think it's a spectacular book, and I very much want it to be really the first expansion of the core rulebook, even though it's coming out before the core rulebook.
I like that. I like that, and you mentioned that quite a few times to sort of make that distinction. This is a do no harm update. It creates this, it keeps things intact, and I like that Trojan War will be a complementary piece, different but complementary. Stan,
a pre-spansion.
A pre-spansion.
A pre-spansion. I like that.
I do like that. That does have a nice mouthfeel. Stan Brown.
Let us plague the language with that neologism.
Oh, let's. We've been tortured. So, I mean, like, there's so many awful, like, when I think about marketing and what they've done to the language. I'm just kidding. Stan says, good fencing makes good neighbors. True. Very true. And then Larry Dixon says, so the applications of these fences were either off fence or defense, and adding and removing fences.
Oh, Larry.
And that's why Larry likes to call it fencing. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Stan. You complete me. Mark Karen says pre-spansion. Yes, I love it. Friends, we have 5 minutes left, and I want to say this has been fascinating to listen to, very interesting to kind of step inside your minds, if only for a moment. Not sure that we could handle the power where we just spend, all day.
My mind absolutely needs a hazmat suit for anyone.
I was going to say basking in the glow of your rather large brains. But in these last 5 minutes, talk to me a bit about, like, what do you have going on outside of your, work as a tabletop role play luminary? Or is this all you get to do? Luminate?
I mean, poor Malcolm can't go anywhere, so
that's true.
I've been getting a little more exercise in.
Nice.
Like, I can't do the fencing that I was talking about, either post or stabby wise, because I'm not allowed to get that close to another person right now.
Couldn't you get like a 6-foot long rapier? Is a really, really long one?
Well, I like a side sword. Actually, Steve, I'll go grab it. Hold on.
Do that.
Owen can talk about something.
Yeah.
When Malcolm talks about, having some experience with these things and his scholarship in the 100-Year War, he's not just talking like we devs frequently talk. He legit has studied this.
Yeah,
and,
They don't call him
has
sword
more
dad.
combat experience than I do.
They don't call him sword dad.
I am just dipping my toes in the concept of socializing again, is all I'm doing.
Yeah.
Seeing small groups of people, thinking about whether they want to get together. Yeah, show us this sword, Malcolm.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think I'll have to turn my
background off. Yeah.
virtual background off.
The hilt is brilliant, but the blade keeps disappearing into another reality, which is cool in and of itself. But
okay, so this is a side sword, and they were used in Europe in the 15th, 16th century on, if I remember right. But they're sort of like the intermediaries between the arming sword, which in gamers call a long sword, and the rapier, right? In that it has a complex hilt, but not a super elaborate swept one. But when people started switching from this kind of grip to doing this all the time, well, it occurred to people that maybe they didn't want their fingers stabbed off,
right,
chopped off, or stabbed. So we have this little cage, right? And this is my favorite one-handed sword to work with.
How come?
and I actually think the design is quite suitable for a setting like Blue Rose,
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
because I think having those fancy, hilts, but not necessarily going the full rapier route, just because you kind of want that cut and thrust
Oh, yeah, yes, indeed.
fantasy movie combat, right? Because I don't know.
No, I agree.
I'm
Yeah.
in the generation that thinks cut and thrust swordplay is the cool swordplay.
Is that a Gen X?
Is the one that thinks that Errol Flynn to the Princess Bride is where it's at. I appreciate that too.
Well, friends, that thank you, Malcolm. I too have taken up weapons. I have joined Larry's team. We are doing the hobby trebuchet.
Oh,
Yeah.
Don't dare Larry to make a hobby trebuchet. He's got the machine shop and the arc welders and the laser cut. He can make a trebuchet.
Larry's just trying to be responsible. You don't have to get close to anybody.
Those are the best.
Yeah, yeah.
I was with some reenactors and they had one on their campsite, and you'd use it to chuck bowling balls at this target, and it was like, wow, I didn't think they'd go that far. And the guy who built it went, well, we had to power it down because when we first tried it, it was chucking bowling balls over the road into the adjoining property.
That is cool.
We're afraid of injuring random livestock.
Sure. I would just use like something around the house to send weird things into my neighbor's yard.
Yeah.
Here's a cat.
You can make trebuchets that'll throw refrigerators and washing machines at people. It's a marvelous design.
Well, Larry, I'm there. Let me know when you need a steady supply of bowling balls and or home appliances. And it is 3:00. That means we've had a full hour of ThursdAGE, and we must bid everyone adieu. Thank everybody for hanging out and having some fun. This has been I again, like I said, I love it. I love listening to the two of you discuss your craft. I think it is a remarkable thing to witness and an unusual thing. I think there's not a lot of people who get this kind of up close and personal look into to people that I would consider geniuses doing their good works. And I am personally inspired, which is why I will have to work on my puns, because that's as much as I've got to offer this whole thing. But thank you both very much. I hope everybody is enjoying Fantasy Age Trojan War. And thank you, David. David says, thank you. Love listening to ThursdAGE. Yeah, we definitely enjoy it, doing this. It's a lot of fun. This is like I want to say it's our 40th show, 41st show, something like that.
No way.
Owen, we've done a lot of these. We've done a lot of them, and they've been a lot of fun. And we might even, Owen, you and I, convince a certain somebody to come and do a little regular sort of stop by, a little what do you call it? A stab and punch, a poke and tickle. What is it? It's a what did you say it was? It's a thrust and garrot.
Cut and thrust.
Cut and thrust. That's what it is, and that's what we will call. I don't know. I just said I just went somewhere, and just words were coming out. But
yeah, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it in the captions, and
you're mesmerized. It is very, very interesting. I can barely keep up. Hey, I want to remind everybody that we have Monday is our Mutants and Masterminds Monday with two other geniuses. We've got Crystal Fraser and Steve Kenson, and the poke and tickle. I don't know what a poke and tickle is, Chad, but don't draw it. But we come to you every Thursday here for ThursdAGE with Owen Casey Stevens, the nicest guy in the industry. I stand by that. And in the meantime, if you've got ideas, if you've got art, you want to draw some poke and tickle, send it. Sorry, I'm cracking myself up. Send an email to let's play at greenronin.com. And can we think of anything else before we close out this fantastic episode?
Trojan War is available in PDF. It is also available in print, on print on demand through drive-through. And if you go to greenronin.com store, you can follow the links.
That's exactly right. And boy, those print on demand books look good. They've done something. They've improved their game over what I'd seen in the past. But speaking of improving our game, we're gonna get out of here. We've got some plans to make, and so friends, we will see you all. Owen will see you next Thursday. I'll see you next Monday. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We truly appreciate it. We will see you later. Goodbye.
Thanks for having me over. Bye.
Our pleasure.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
folks.